on this week's episode of the Jesse T Show, the amazing and powerful Sam Chin, co-founder of Cavi Consulting. So Sam, welcome to the Jesse T Show.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I know you've been traveling all around the country and doing different things with different clients and having a little bit of fun along the way. So wanted to have you on the show because there's a ton of value you can add on a lot of different things you've experienced, a lot of different things you've done in business. And so I wanted to share that with the world. So tell the world a little bit about Sam Chin.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I started Cavi Consulting. That's my own company, and I started that about 3 years ago. And what we do is consulting based on process science techniques, which is proprietary, or I made it up myself, basically.
Sure.
But it's an evolution of traditional process improvement techniques. So people in the space might be familiar with Lean or Six Sigma, some of the more traditional things from manufacturing. But what we try to do is make it a more comprehensive process methodology for managing processes for business who are in digital services or they're scattered, their staff is scattered around the world. And a lot of it is based on my personal experience and just seeing a lot of gaps in the marketplace. So that's what we do, and we help businesses evolve. That's really kind of our tagline. We help them become more conscious.
What was this idea born out of? So where did the idea come from for the company itself and kind of the iteration of the idea?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really been just iterating, doing good consulting work over my entire career. So what I will say is the idea really came from I was consulting with traditional consultancies, or I was doing in-house, and I was doing process improvement. I love process improvement work, and I studied. I was a student of Lean, I was a student of Six Sigma, but it just wasn't resonating. It was very difficult work, and people were trying to force fit the same techniques with the same, I guess, strategies with clients that just wasn't working. Marketing agencies, smaller companies, people who are more digital, people who need to change every 3 months instead of every year now. And it was becoming much more difficult. So really, if I wanted to be a good or a decent consultant, I myself had to challenge myself to iterate. And a lot of those methods became what now I call process science methods, and that's what I brought into my firm. So I think, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I got to the point where I wanted to do it better myself, and I had bosses that kind of weren't getting out of the way, and then I really had to just forge a path and kind of get it out there.
Yep. And so when you're building and scaling this company over the last 3 years, which congratulations, by the way, 3 years is a great milestone because you've kind of got out of that. You're still technically a startup within the first 5 years, but you're at that point where you're becoming a seasoned startup and becoming more of an established business. And I know you've done some great things in those 3 years. So what has that journey been like from day one to 36 months later to where, like, just kind of that growth that you've experienced in business, in your personal life along this journey?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have to bring my personal life a little bit into it because I don't think I could have ever done this business if I hadn't gone through some personal growth around the exact same timeline. And the biggest thing about that is something that probably everyone's heard, but it's really just staying present with it, staying present with your business. You know, when I said I was getting frustrated and I wanted to start building something, it wasn't, hey, let's get $1 million funding round, or, you know, let's take 6 months off from my regular job and really build this business out. You know, being an entrepreneur is doing what you have to sustain yourself, but then finding what you're passionate about and then making that your hobby and doing it all the time. So when you ask kind of, how did I start a consulting brand in the midst of just living my life? It was first just building a test website. It was me alone in my room talking to my friends about having an idea about I was going to do this new methodology, or I was going to consult this way, or I was going to change the world doing this or that. And then the reality that most entrepreneurs can probably tell you is it's not that glamorous. You go to your computer, you have a few hours at night, and you start fooling around with paint and trying to build like a brand concept. Or
I've been there.
Yeah. And then you start building your first blog post, or you start putting together some content. You say, where do I need to put this? And you just start building. You build a container that your energy can go into and it kind of hold it. It's like investing your passion into something physical. You know, and a lot of entrepreneurs, they want to build the entire plan. I do no planning. You know, it really comes down to, am I enjoying myself, and am I building something I can share with somebody else, I can relate to at another time that will help me? And that is the start of my business. And over the years, sharing it with people get more excited, people get more engaged, they volunteer, they want to help. You know, clients are willing to let me in the door and do some pro bono work. I mean, like most entrepreneur stories, I think you have to be able to take your licks, but you have to accept the fact that you're not going to explode overnight. And that was certainly the case for us. So, 3 years in, you don't remember what the last year was like when you were 5 steps behind, when you had nothing.
Right.
And now I've got a whole drive and staff full of content, full of things that I built. And it was just one day at a time, just building that stuff.
Yep.
So I could go on about that journey for a long time, but I think the summary is, if I didn't have enough patience with myself and love for myself on my personal side, which was a big milestone for me, to say that it's okay to take things slow, it's okay to just do this one day at a time and not know if it's going to work, not know if it's contributing to some greater goal.
Sure.
That's how the business got momentum. That's how it built itself. And unless I was able to get out of my own way personally, there was no way that was going to happen, not with this business.
Yep. And I think that, for a lot of people that listen to this and watch this, understanding how to do that or ways to do that is super important. Being able to build, scale, grow, maintain, and then continue to build and grow on top of what you've already created is one thing, but then you still have to be a person amongst all of that. You still have to have personal, hobbies, interests, self-development, all these things that you're into. And so I know that you've done a lot of personal growth, and you've done a lot of searching for how to become a better human being, how to be better in relationships, and how to be a better founder and partner. And so talk a little bit about kind of your road from where your mindset shifted, and talking about kind of some of the changes on the personal side that led you down the path of discovery.
Yeah, for sure. So a few years ago, I'd say my personal journey in this way started when I read A New Earth, and that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And that's a very popular book by Eckhart Tolle, and he wrote The Power of Now, and it really just talks about what I mentioned casually before, which is just, what does it mean to be more present? Yeah. And in this day and age, you hear that a lot. Let's meditate, let's kind of get more present. And for me, as a process person, I guess this is where my intellectual pursuits kind of merged with, what is he talking about here? And I spent a lot of time reflecting on, what is the logic of staying present? Because I still today will have arguments with people who say, you got to build your 5-year plan and your 10-year plan, and you got to have goals and you got to reach towards them. And then you've got this whole new body of people talking about, well, presence is the key to happiness, and remaining present and trying to stay here and not think too much or cast your mind too far into the future. Yep. So for me, it's kind of intellectually grasping those things and reconciling them, and that was my journey. And when I started to, my spiritual journey kind of started when I said, I understand what it means to stop planning, to stop being hard on myself because I didn't actualize this goal or I didn't meet this milestone. Yep. But is to just constantly build now. Every bit of energy you have, now it's almost like getting to more trite things that you hear a lot of the time, where there's no tomorrow, there's no next month. You got to do it now. But it really is, it's the little compromises that you make with yourself every day, which is, well, I can pick this up next week, or I'm not feeling this now, or I want to do something else. And all these little conversations, which is, what do I want to do right now? And how do I throw myself into doing that 100%? And that could be resting. Yep. And it could be just taking a break. Yep. It could be whatever. And that's really what presence was for me in the beginning, and really kind of cultivating that sort of high energy everything all the time. Yep. Because just aligning with, in this moment, I don't have to meet this deadline next week, so I can just do what I want, and just following that. Yep. And I think that was really where the spiritual study came really big into my business and into my personal life, where I started reading more, I started following that as a hobby also, and I started to unlock incredible insight that I moved into my business practices. So I think for me, it's been particularly important, because if I didn't have that, and sometimes I don't sell it this way, but that's what powers everything, kind of my personal journey, which is understanding the logic of living a healthy, conscious, balanced life, because a business is nothing more than a group of humans. So when I help businesses, I help them try to live a balanced, healthy life and presence. And then you get into the mechanics of that, but that's sort of the rambling way about how those things are interrelated.
Sure. I think that, like you said, I deal with individuals, I deal with businesses, but when I deal with businesses, it's the individuals in that business that make it run or have the need for help. And so along your journey, this is something that, I've also kind of dipped my toe in the water and learning and understanding. And there's this new social consciousness of things that are out there, like plant medicines and different things that can help you along your path to be more spiritual, to shake the ego, break the ego, reset some things in your life to get a better perspective. And there's places in the country that are already kind of the forefront runner of this, trying to take things like psilocybin and make it used for medicinal purposes and make it legal. And so there's also other things, like people can go on retreats and they can do different things. And one of them is like a ayahuasca journey, a spiritual journey kind of thing. And so this is something I've looked into, because I've also been on a spiritual journey my whole life. We talked about before getting on the show. We both grew up Catholic. We both, for me, I can say anyway, that I was force-fed a religion, a doctrine to follow that maybe I didn't necessarily believe in as a kid, and I kind of saw a lot of things that I didn't adhere to. And so for me, I've always believed in God. I believed in a higher power, a oneness, a source kind of thing. But I just don't know if religion was the right path for me to get to that point. And so for me, I've always been learning and growing and trying to try different things and look at different things and not discount one thing over another. And so one thing that's kind of caught my attention recently is a spiritual journey through plant medicines, also ayahuasca, going somewhere and being guided by a shaman or someone who is a master at this type of ceremony that can walk me through and kind of help me mend some fences, learn some new things, and learn new understandings about myself. And so talk a little bit about your journey, because you've done some of those things too. What was that like for you?
Yeah, for sure. So like you mentioned, I went on a 10-day plant medicine-based journey in Peru with a shaman and from the Paititi Institute. And I really, that movie, they did a movie called The Sacred Sciences. Okay. And it talks all about plant medicine and the power of healing. And I got keyed into that. And, years ago, I started talking with some psychics that I met in New York City. So, for somebody who came from a very traditional business background, it was definitely a tough transition. I was becoming the guy I was made fun of for the last 10 years.
Sure.
Kind of in the space, experimenting with stuff that was a little more fringe and seemed a little bit like the stuff that people grasped onto when they were really in trouble.
Right.
And then I found myself contemplating it more and more seriously. And so I didn't want to jump right into the ayahuasca journey that I just went to it cold. I mean, I had been speaking with people who had kind of been leading me there for several years.
Yep.
And I'd gone through a lot of introspection.
Yep.
But I will say I'm thankfully in very good health physically. So I went down there just for spiritual and emotional healing.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, I've always been somebody who poo-pooed on Western therapists also.
Sure.
But I think after some of the journey I've been on, I've really realized that most people, even the ones that say they're the healthiest of mind and body, there's always healing. There's always things to process from your past, from your childhood.
Yep.
And if you're open to it and you're open to meeting those things, that's what these plant medicine ceremonies, I think, really help with. And for me, it helped me with my business. It helped me be a stronger person, but they're all interrelated.
Yep.
The stronger person you become, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you got to be able to love yourself first.
Yeah.
Just like, people tell you if you're going to love other people, you got to love yourself
Start
first.
with yourself.
If you want to love your business.
Yep.
And that's how businesses grow. They grow on love. That's the reality of it. You have to love yourself first.
Yep.
So when I went and I did a 10-day ceremony down in sort of the Andes, you go in there thinking, hey, I've been studying this stuff for a few years and, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty, healthy with myself. But I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you can't, it's not, there's no amount of gold that's worth what you get from these kind of journeys, in my opinion.
Sure.
Because it brings you to your knees. I mean, it takes everything from you in some ways, and it's really just because it gives you clarity. It gives you vision. We live our whole lives, whether you're in your early 20s, late 20s, early 30s, late 30s, it doesn't make a difference. You've been living for decades with presumptions about how society works, about religion, growing up in the Catholic Church, growing up in any major religion. It's a set of rules, dogmas. It's a way that you see reality, and it's just stripped away from you. It's just seeing things more clearly. And once you see those things, it's hard to go back. And sometimes it's very intense. And I would definitely say to people, it's not all fun and games. Don't take it lightly. But if you're ready for the work, I mean, it took me to a new level, personally and in my business. And I'll pause there, because I feel like if you want anything else, the ayahuasca journeys are very intense and they're fantastic. I would say it really helped me a lot.
I do want to touch on a little bit, because this is a potential journey that I'll go down, and I know there's some people that are listening and watching that are interested in learning about something that's rooted in ancient, almost an ancient science, but to be able to live one foot in the ancient world, but also have one foot in the future or technology, it's good to meld those things together. And so being mindful of those things, what does the actual 10-day journey look like, and what is the few ceremonies that you had during that time, and kind of, the process, and how the shaman works with you and helps you through things, and some of the things that you discovered. And then kind of when you came out of that, what was your new lens on life, and how did you look at things?
Yeah, for sure. So the 10-day, this type of ceremony, I think this type of retreat, and some of them are structured similarly, it's a lot of detox, first and foremost. Yep. So out of the 10 days, what do you spend most of your time doing? A lot of it you spend meditating. You spend just with yourself in silence. You're discouraged from bringing books. There's no technology. I mean, I didn't see a clock for 10 days.
Wow. Wow, what was that like? Just not knowing what time it was, because people look at their phone all day, every day.
Yeah.
And they know down to the second what time it is. So like, what does even something like that make you feel like? What were some of the things you got from that?
It's a detox in every sense of the word. So for the first few days, you're anxiety ridden.
Sure.
Because you're breaking what you're used to using all the time to orient yourself in life.
Yep.
You know what time
compass
it is.
Almost. Yeah.
Should I be asleep? Should I be awake? Should I be somewhere? It kind of puts you in a relaxed state naturally that most of us can't afford in modern society, which is I don't have to be anywhere, I don't have to do anything, and there's nothing that needs to be concerned about. Yep. That's how you get used to what being present feels like and looks like, because there's no schedule to adhere to. And it's intense. I mean, not reading, not being on your phone, not having a computer, it in itself is healing in ways that I think one could imagine. But we're just, in modern society, we're not positioned to take those things and drop them on the table for 3, 4, 5 days at a time.
People can't do it.
It's just not possible. Because the pace at which we work and live, it necessitates it, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not some person who, it's easy to get that person like, hey, not having a phone and not having a computer is fantastic. But it's not quite that. It's just sometimes to remember what it was like. To just be a human being and just be an animal and just
before
live.
Constantly being busy and constantly being pulled away at the ding here or the text message here. I mean, like just being present and doing less but doing more by doing less, like thinking more and being present and working on yourself. You don't have time to do those things when you're constantly every 5 to 7 seconds being distracted by something. Yeah,
exactly. And that's a big part of what people don't get about presence is, or I shouldn't say people don't get, but people I think who I've talked to, there's a lot of misconceptions about what that is, that you have to meditate to reach presence. Presence is just the absence of thinking. It's the absence of not being here and taking in what's happening around you. And you can do that for a second. You can do it in a single breath in between your calls at work. I mean, any moment of any day. And when you learn what that feels like, when you're present, you're taking in more information. So it's kind of like muscle memory. So when you talk about the retreat, it's a huge investment in knowing what it feels like in your whole body to just be here right now and be able to react to what's happening around you. Because what a lot of times people get lost in businesses too, and what is efficiency? Efficiency is not guessing what you don't know and what you don't see. It's taking everything you can know and grasp now and using that to act. And that's the power of presence, and in business and in your personal life. Because if you're sitting there thinking about what you don't know, if you zoom out on yourself, you're just sitting there doing nothing. And that's what getting lost in thought is about. And people don't realize that if you take a snapshot of human beings in their day, it's start, stop. Because sometimes you're just sitting there, doing nothing, lost in your thinking. That's productivity lost for you and for others. So I'd say these retreats, besides just chilling out and learning to be here, you get a ton of transmissions, which is just knowledge being passed to you, knowledge about history of the shaman and their culture, knowledge about how the ancient people lived and how some of that could be relevant or not relevant to our modern day, and also knowledge about how the medicine works and how it's going to treat your body and what we're here to do. Like, what is our purpose in studying and using these medicines? And then the other part is you are on a very strict diet.
So, how strict? What does the diet look like?
So the diet is, the majority is boiled quinoa and yucca root. So it's very bland, very plain. But you want to talk about detoxing, not having any fat, not having any spice, not having any salt for 10 days. It also changes your palate. And it's the same thing of people who are exploring vegetarianism or veganism. If you give it enough time, your palate changes. So you're not so ramped up to eat some of the things that you feel like you can't live without.
You're not craving those things, the salts, the different things. Like you can have something that's more of a bland diet.
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of also respecting the plant medicine, because you can't go into the plant medicine with any of these things in your body. So it's a vegan diet is what they serve on this retreat particularly. There's some fish, especially in some lineages, but generally you're eating roots, you're eating boiled grains native to the area. You have a very clean diet. So you're cleansing your body, and then the plant medicines help you cleanse your mind. It's just about self-discovery, companionship with nature and yourself, and loving yourself. I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's just finding compassion for yourself, which is something as an entrepreneur and as somebody who came from a very traditional route of doing the business school thing, doing the whole, wanting to succeed, wanting to make money, wanting to raise a family the right way. Having compassion for yourself is the hardest thing. And it's the practice that I'm working on every day, which is, it doesn't matter if you made a mistake or relative to what you were trying to do. It doesn't matter if you're being lazy today. It doesn't matter if you didn't get kind of the client or you didn't get this big thing. You have to love yourself and be gentle, or you can't work, you can't live.
Having compassion in empathy for yourself. Most people don't think of it that way because they're always learning, reading, doing about how to have empathy for others or compassion for other people. There's things out there like nonviolent communication that's been really big in like kind of the vernacular of society recently, but like being compassionate with yourself, it goes back to loving yourself first. If you don't have a compassion or love for yourself, you really can't have it for anyone else. And you can't understand how to communicate that if you can't communicate it with yourself. So I think that these are huge, number one, as a human being, these are huge foundations for you to have going through life and doing life, but it bleeds over into your business. And so going through this spiritual journey, which is a lifelong journey while we're here. Yeah. You started a few years ago and you got really intense and you've gone through this really impressive 10-day plant medicine journey. What were some of the other things that you see? You did one ceremony, you took some information from there, and then was there a couple days before you went to the next ceremony? And what did that ceremony look like before, the third one?
Yeah. So in this particular retreat, I did a ceremony on day 2. And then another on day 5, and then toward the end, I think on day 9, of various plant-based medicines. Okay. And the first one basically undid a lot of what I thought I knew for the last few years in terms of my persona, my ego, whatever words that people are familiar with. But in terms of, like you said, it's easy to love other people and kind of make yourself feel better about doing it and ignore yourself. But at the end of the day, you're just depleted and you're not a good person because you can't love anyone unless you can love yourself. And it's hard to admit that to yourself. The plant medicine has a good way of making you see the lies that you're telling yourself. So that's really, I think at the end of the day, it's what it's about.
What were some of the lies you found?
So kind of the one I just alluded to, which is I had gotten to a really good place where I felt like I've been very generous, I've been very loving, I've been very giving with my time. And it kind of gives you an excuse not to focus on yourself or your own narrative. And this whole loving yourself was a theme of my last retreat. That was one of the biggest things that I got from that first journey, which is you're a charlatan, basically. And it's hard to hear that. And when you kind of look at yourself and say, then you question everything. So there's definitely a bit of panic, or at least in my experience, where you have this experience where, hey, I'm kicking ass in business, I'm a great guy, everyone likes me, I'm also like really generous, and because at the end of the day, it sounds bad to say it that way, but this is the things that you feel. This is how you judge yourself, and you're like, I'm doing all the right things, and people like hanging out with me, and this is going well, and I'm finding a lot of benevolence in my life right now. But then when you get down, and it's like having a plant-based medicine or a person sit down and tell you, you're really trying hard, and you're going through the motions, but it's not authentic. There's no happiness here, and there's no sustainability here. And that unless you turn toward yourself and you figure out how to do that first, all of your efforts are really just shallow. And that's kind of a life-shattering thing to kind of hear, and that's an internal dialogue. So you wake up the next day and you feel like, is my business even right? Am I doing questioning. It all? You question everything. And a lot of times that's the hardest part in life, and you could say whatever kind of journey you're on, or whether you're following a major religion or anything, it's kind of this reflection and asking yourself the hard questions about, am I actually doing it? It's introspection. And I think that a lot of times we're so busy in life now, we don't do enough of it. But it's not even because we don't want to, it's just because we don't leave the space for it. If you're at the end of a hard day, you can watch an hour of the new Netflix show, or you can sit there and be introspective.
It takes work, and it's mental acuity, and you have to have an endurance for it. So, I mean, people that want to do these types of things, because there's this integration when you come back, and we'll kind of touch on that in a moment, but being able to put the work in after. So you did some work on the front end, you got the information, but now you actually have to apply that moving forward in your life and understand what that's like. And that takes endurance, that takes mental strength. Like, you have to continually work on things to become habit and break old habits.
It's definitely, and that's definitely the case. And it's tough because, especially when you're an entrepreneur, when you have your own business or you're doing well, and then you have an experience where you question whether any of this is sustainable and any of it matches what I want to be doing or is honest for me to be doing, you really go into a tailspin. And then especially, in my experience, I had that first pretty big kick in the butt right off the bat, and you kind of work yourself back out of it. You work yourself into a gentler place, and that's the whole point. Like, why are you being so hard on yourself? Is because you're so hard on yourself. One of the biggest things for this retreat that the shaman kind of helped me with was, you can't relax. Well, relax with not being able to relax.
So be okay with it.
And that's always, it's acceptance. And you think that, hey, I'm trying to relax, so I'm trying to be okay with relaxing. But even that can give you stress. And just realizing there's layers and layers on that, and then no matter what's happening, you got to relax with it. And by the time I came out of it, and to your point, how do I come back now and still work in my business? Well, first you have to say, is this the right business for me? And that's a big thing too.
Was that a question at one point? Not that, you obviously 3 years later you're still doing it, but like, did you have to work through that piece of it as well?
Yeah, I definitely did. And we were just talking about the difficulty of spending time questioning yourself, and a lot of people don't spend the time, but would you rather work on a business and make it successful for 10 years that wasn't your business?
Right.
Or would you rather drop it, at 2 years and then start something you really care about? And a lot of people feel like they don't have the space or the luxury to answer those questions and act on them. But that's a lot of what you learn when you slow down, which is you always have the choice. And certainly I asked myself that, because when I went into a deeper place of questioning myself and my motives and why I was doing certain things, you have to say, is this the right business for me? Is this a business I should be building? Is this a business I care about and I'm actually passionate about? Or am I doing this because I want to succeed, or I want to prove myself, or want to do something?
Live up to a society standard of something. Competitive or whatever.
Or even do I want to afford my family a certain type of lifestyle that society has said you need this much money to accommodate? Because even that stuff can feel very altruistic in some ways, where like, I will give my life for my family, I will give it to support my either my nuclear family or my extended family, and people don't like to question those things often. But the big thing I tell people is, if you're aligned with what you want to do, you can do more. You can give more to those same people. You don't have to box yourself in by saying it has to be this business, it has to be this venture. So it's always be honest with yourself first, and then you'll produce the most you can for everybody. So I definitely questioned, and I'm still here, as you mentioned. So I think I was kind of on the right track, and there's definitely been questions along the road, but part of keeping it aligned with yourself is letting your business grow with you. So when you also kind of talked about, how do you bring it back? How do you come back after sort of a deeper, bout of working with yourself and having, let's say, spiritual alignment or spiritual work? Well, a lot of it is being adaptable and kind of understanding that, hey, I wanted my business to look like X, and it's starting to look like Y, and letting it become Y. Letting it progress in its own kind of way. You've got to. I mean, and this is the same thing with when I do the consulting work for businesses. They ask, how can I become the best version of X? And sometimes the market doesn't want you to be that anymore. So my answer can't be, well, you do all these things, you take these pills, and you do these exercises, and then you become a stronger, tougher version of what you are now. It's the market, the business itself is calling for you to evolve. It's calling for you to change, to do something new. Can you listen to that call? Can you put yourself aside and answer that? That's how you be successful.
Put the work in.
And do the work. And do the work, because at that point you're doing the work for your business and you're not doing it for yourself. Just like if you want to work with your family or your friends, you're doing it for them. You're not doing it for you. And if you love yourself, then you can put yourself aside and you can do those things. So you can start to see how they're all interrelated. And how do you come back? You've got to fit the pieces together. It's one thing to discover something huge for your life in the jungle or in the mountains, and then come back and just forget about it and do everything the same way. So I think the work, and the work of my business too, and how I've gone my own journey, is not losing track of the things that I know are true in one context and seeing how they can all be true at the same time. It's reconciliation. That's really, and again, it comes back to the word integration, which is you find a deeper truth somewhere, and if you believe it, how do you make sure that it checks in your model of how do you live all the rest of your life? Because if you can't make those things reconcile, then you're sacrificing, you're picking one over the other, and that's where people have a lot of tension. So that's really, I guess, coming out of that experience, it's been the work. It's the work of how does my business embody what I believe on my personal life and what I believe, and I consult for other businesses, and that's how I try to balance that whole ecosystem.
What are some of the routines or integrations that you had to kind of keep going, coming back from the journey, that have proven to stay in alignment with what you learned and have been helpful in your personal life and your business moving forward?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, again, gentleness and reminding yourself that you don't, of what you've gone through. And this doesn't even have to apply, I guess, to spiritual work particularly. But what I mean by that is, it's easy to come back after a week, let's say in the woods, metaphorically, where you're listening to no music, it's silent, it's quiet, and then you come right back into hanging out with your friends, going to the club, listening to music in the coffee shop, on the bus. Like, there's no quiet in our lives ever. And it's
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, and in my circles, I've become a sort of a stodgy sort of, I like quiet, and it's really tough sometimes, because when you know what quiet feels like and you know how peaceful it can be, and you're okay listening to your own thoughts, it can be very jarring to never be able to have it. When I lived in New York City for a number of years, it was one of the things that drove me out of the city, that there was no quiet anywhere. It was a resource that you had to buy at like painstaking length. You either claw your way out of the city or find a place where there's no music playing or no traffic or no chatter. It's very difficult. So I find it difficult is the short answer, but it's remembering that it is difficult and remembering that there is another place and another space, letting your body remember that because it's so easy to forget. And I think that's what, when you talk about how do you come back, how do you keep the lessons, how do you keep the strength up? At first, you sometimes are not going to change the city you're living in. If you come back to a major city or you're a consultant and you're traveling every day, you're not going to be able to make the world quiet around you. So it's not about forcing, it's about accepting that that's where you're at and just remembering that there is a quiet place and that it exists and that it feels different. And remember what that feeling of peace and kind of what that gives you.
Sure.
So, I mean, I would say a lot of it is the balancing is just knowing that they will come into balance one day. But I don't whip myself every day that I can't bring them all into balance now, because you're talking about some huge things. Like society now it's at its own pace. So if you want to live at a different pace, you've got to kind of make some compromises.
You got to change in a sense, because it's hard to change the world around you. And so like picking up and moving to a different state or removing yourself from a situation, even if it's momentarily, like you have to be mindful of what you're chasing and not give up on that and not fall back into old habits, like you mentioned, and get back into old routines. And, because while that's okay in a sense, you've kind of just wasted time, effort, energy, and a piece of yourself by going through all the work to get to that point in the first place.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and for some people, I agree, and it's hard to call it ever a waste, because if you feel something real and you feel something you haven't felt before, it stays with you. But I agree, there's a lot of people when they talk about the difficulties of what they call integrating when you come back from doing this kind of work, is that you consciously forget, and it's a choice you make. You just forget because it's too hard to bring these things in balance, or you become too jaded, or you become that archetype of somebody who can no longer remain in society because it's just too painful.
Sure.
Or it's, it's
that's
too
the
much.
flip side, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because you can stay true to what you learned and you can disappear. And I've had those moments, I'll be honest.
You thought about going somewhere, just see you later.
Just disappearing. But I have a lot of loving friends and family and who are meeting me where I'm at, and they'll always say, you have a lot to give, and like we'd like to see you stay here.
That's awesome.
Among people, and like give your gifts and share your knowledge. And it's the balancing act, but you can't go one way or the other.
During the times where it's like, hey, I'm out, like what would have been some of your best laid plans? Like what did you think of going, and what did it look like for you? Are you going to like Alaska and becoming like off the grid? Like what are some of the things you thought about doing during those times, which you obviously haven't done? So
yeah, well, that's the irony, because when I'm feeling most in those times, it's most in the times where there is no plan. And to be in that state of mind, there is not like, I'm going to have to plan to move out into the woods or go to Alaska. It's kind of it's this deep-seated feeling of, I can't be here anymore now. And then wanting to act on it. And what that looks like sometimes is unclear, but it's, I can't show up to this job, I can't deal with these people.
So it's like almost a momentary, somewhat impulsive feeling where it's like at the moment you feel like you just need a separation, but then you can kind of get back to it and that kind of fades away a little bit. Until the next time. It
oscillates, and that's part of the tricky part, and that's partly where I'm at. And a lot of people who are ahead of me or in different places, they could probably even give more insight about how you balance this, but it can be in the moment. That moment can last for a long time, where you just feel overwhelmed by the noise and the interactions, and you just wonder if this is sustainable. But at the end of the day, you oscillate, because it's hard, like to actually act on that, to say, I'm done with this job, because there's always two parts. There's, especially when now I have my own business, I could step away, but there's people who I love who rely on the business. It's not just shielding myself from negative interactions with other people. It's also, is my work important in this moment because it helps other people?
Right. Step outside of yourself, be bigger than yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those conversations that I think can get very intense, and you try to I try not to dwell on it too much, but there's suspended moments where I think this is not going to be viable. This will not be sustainable. But that makes you bend. This is the last time I'm going to take an account that looks like this. This is the last time I'm going to make a deal with the devil and make this money to do this type of thing.
Right.
And a lot of people, being present is kind of just knowing that and admitting it to yourself, and then saying, when the next time this comes up, I'm going to remember what this feels like.
Make a different decision.
And I'm going to make a different decision. Or it can work in subtle ways, but it's never an easy answer, because I tell you, But there are times where you just feel like I could go back to the woods and drop my phone in a lake and not know the time for months and months at a time.
Yeah.
And really just because
come back looking like Yeti. Just
happiness is happiness, and that's one thing that, I've had people tell me over the years when I have conversations, you would want to do this, this, and this. Your life would be boring if you were just happy all the time. And I just listen to what you said. If I was happy all the time, then I'd be happy all the time.
Right. You wouldn't know it any other
way. You
yeah.
wouldn't need the roller coaster of being sad and being angry and being peaked and kind of getting this excitable.
Which people need though, and they don't need it, but they crave it because it's an addiction, like the cycle.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And it's been a jarring conversation for me because people easily skip over it. They think they can't be happy if there's not sadness preceding it.
Right.
They can't be calm if there's not angriness or excitement
society's taught us.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is an addiction.
Marketing has taught us these things, our friends. I mean, there's so many pieces to figure out that it just really starts here. And once you figure out this, then the world operates a little bit differently. So speaking of operating in the world differently, when you've come back and you've done the journey and you've done the work, you've done the integration, and I'm sure the work always continues to some degree, right? You felt the need to share that experience, and you actually published a book.
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so my book, Becoming a Conscious Business, and I think the subtext or subtitle is Expand Your Life and Work Through the Science of Energy Flow. It's a book about a lot of what we talked about. It's a book about how I came to process science, which is sort of what I consider the new process improvement methods for our age. And in addition to being about process science, it is about my personal life.
Yep.
It is through the lens of my life and some of the harder things that I've dealt with, and how my personal growth has helped me become a better professional and create these methods and really seam together a lot of what's I learned from studying nature and studying people directly and studying businesses. And I think that my book is kind of a teaser, I would like to say, for process science.
Sure.
And it touches on a lot of bigger topics.
Smart. Yeah.
Yeah. But it definitely was a labor of love for me personally.
How long did it take you to get it all done? Like written, done, edited, published? Like what would the whole process look like?
So it was 6 months.
That's actually pretty quick.
It is.
That's pretty quick. Yeah.
And once I started, it was almost a form of my own therapy, which is why I think
cathartic,
extremely cathartic. I mean, I wrote about things from my childhood, about my divorce, about, personal difficulties that I've had just trying to live. And then trying to find myself, losing a lot of things. I mean,
but you gain everything when you lose everything. I feel like that's like a weird little thing. I think I heard this in Fight Club of all places years ago. He talks about it's only when you've lost everything that you can finally realize like what you have, and like the optimism, the gratefulness, the gratitude, like that comes at those moments.
Yeah, it's certainly true. And I would say one thing I'd expand on that concept, it's not even that you lose everything. It's that a lot of times it's you realize you never owned anything to start with.
Right.
And that's the biggest thing, at least that's how it felt for me, which is that I never had anything to lose in the first place because ownership and all of these things that we cling to, they're
it's momentary
sometimes.
In a sense too. If you think about the grand scheme of life and the eons that not to get too woo-woo as we talked about, but like the eons that things have been around. I mean, it always passes through. Like I mean, you have a car for a couple of years, you go on to the next one. So like you own things, but you really truly don't. Like they're just kind of passing by in your life story. Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And this is what it's such. And we could talk for days and days on all of these topics that we're kind of just brushing very lightly. And that's what a lot of the book was too, which was talking about the relativity of time and space, and talking about how all these things you hear, everyone grows up learning about Einstein's theories in high school, or you learn about this, or you learn about that, but actually just pausing and thinking about how they all reconcile, and how that can then be practically applied to business. That's really kind of where I'm taking my story, and why even if I came out of all this important work, I think it's an important story to share. And as long as people keep telling me that, hey, this is some interesting stuff and it helps me out, then I think that's enough to drive me for now.
Putting everything down into a book form where you could share your truth, share your business ideas, tie it all together with your personal story. It's actually something that I'm working on myself too. And so I have a book that I'm working on. It's going to start off as an ebook, much like you said, an enhanced business card to be able to get my story and my journey, but my business ideas out there. And it's a working title of 10 Ways to Become Wealthy Happily. And so the happily is the most important thing. The book starts off with a whole mindset piece and the understanding of emotional, finance, and the understanding of how to build habits habits and winning habits, and like before you even get into it, because then it's a practical utilitarian book where it says, here's the 10 steps. If you follow these, you will become wealthy at fairly a decent pace versus trying to wait your whole lifetime. And it answers questions of why would I want to build wealth for my whole life to maybe never use it? What's the importance of having money and all these things? And so I think that putting those dynamics of business and personal together, that's just what the world is looking for anymore. Because you can have a winning business idea, but if no one cares about like who you are as a person, they're never going to read that book. So I think that having those venues and those ideas to put out those platforms, the books, I think it's really, I'm going to cut back because I don't like that part. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Having those venues to be able to get those ideas out into the mainstream is super important to share your journey. So now that that's out there, you're building the business, you're working on yourself. So what are the next, if you even know them now, like what would you like to see happen in the next little bit with Cavi Consulting, with Sam Chin as the human being?
Yeah, absolutely. So, based on this conversation, it may not be super surprising, but I don't really have a plan, and I don't really have an objective. I try to build things like the book. I try to build things like the company and my offerings and what I build with clients to be aligned with myself and what I feel passionate about, aligned with the growing company, what my partners and my staff feel passionate about. And we just keep building more and more and just kind of letting it grow into itself. So I would say, I feel another book coming on. Okay. That certainly is coming. Okay. And just like I would describe how the first book was, you live and you observe and you experience things, you work with clients and you get a lot of feedback and you're just constantly iterating and churning stuff in your head. And every once in a while, like I felt with the first book, I've got to clear some space and I've got to put it somewhere on paper. And I think that will get me to the next level. Yep. But I think it's it goes back to I'm listening to what I feel like I need to do. If a big client came to me right now and said, hey, will you take a 6-month engagement? I have to listen in and say, this is really lucrative, but I really feel like I got to write another book right now, or I got to do this, or I got to do that.
Would you go with the book, or would you have to go with the deal?
Well, and that's where, again, I'm going to be challenged in the moment if that actually happens.
It's a tough decision to make.
Yeah, and that's the practice, right? And I don't know. I don't know what I do, but right now, after the last big thing I kind of came off of, I said, I need a break. I need to focus on writing stuff, and I need to focus on building the knowledge and doing other things. Yep. And what I will say is, if there's anything that I have faith in, because I try to just live my life with what's around me, and I don't really rely on belief or faith that often. Sure. But I'd say one of my personal mantras is, if you just do what you want to do in that moment, and not as selfish and impulsive as that sounds, let's put that aside for a second. Sure. If you're being really honest with yourself, you will always be more productive. You will always yield more. Yep. So giving up that contract, that's money on the table now to do a new book or do a speaking tour or whatever, even though it may seem counterintuitive sometimes, usually if my gut pulls me one way and you follow it, that's trust. And that's trusting yourself. That's trusting an instinct. Yep. A lot of people talk about entrepreneurs using their gut or using their instincts. And what does that mean? A lot of times they're saying like that's not a way to make decisions, but actually it's the most powerful way to make decisions, because your gut is you're just making a game day call right now with everything you can muster. Yep. And a lot of times you second guess that. If you just get used to making space to not counter that notion, to not question yourself, or not have that discussion or rationalize based on what other people are telling you against that instinct, you don't know the path sometimes, and you have to cede control. But that's how I've been living, and the more I try to live that way, there's no plan. So there's always a sense of sort of chaos, but I'm cooking stuff. Like I'm cranking, and like the productivity just keeps going up and up. You feel like a super. You're
living your ethos, your truth, and I think there's a really good concept about what you're trying to explain with just kind of going with your gut or what feels right. Going back to Simon Sinek, and he's changed my life in terms of how you think about things and how the brain works when it comes to processing decisions. And there's the what it is, the how it works, and then the why. And the why is the most important thing when you're trying to convey a belief or an idea, because people, they don't resonate with features and benefits. They don't resonate with, well, this makes sense here from price point, this makes sense here. Like sometimes they're like, well, it just doesn't feel right. There's something they just can't muster because it works in a different part of the brain that doesn't have speech tied to it. But your gut's similar in that fashion, where if it doesn't feel right, or if it does feel right, and you may not be able to explain it in the moment, or like you said, it's a game day decision, so it's a super quick, audible, kind of on the fly. But a lot of times it turns out for the best, because you are doing all the other things around it. That's staying true to your core belief, but you're also, like you said, doing all the work, cooking in the kitchen, like building things, putting things out, putting out content, building new contracts with clients. If all that other stuff, the work meets the gut, I think that's kind of like a life better lived than if you didn't do it.
Yeah, and the more you live this way, and this is why in the beginning I think it's easier for people to grapple with when you think about it, it's like you have to have faith that it will work out. You end up planting a lot of seeds, but the plan is too complicated for you to actually understand. And there's so many times where when you start living more following your instincts, boss comes in the morning and says, hey, do this thing for me. And you're like, cool, I'll do this thing. And then he comes back 2 hours later doing something totally different. It's like, well, I thought we had a plan. Like, I thought you were doing this. And I said, I just wasn't feeling it, and I pivoted. And for other people, it can be frustrating. And that's why people will tell you that these are the people who are difficult to work with. It's like they're the people that are very frenetic and they're jumping from thing to thing. But, I say you don't have to do it as an asshole. You don't have to say like, hey, you told me one thing and I was like, I ignored you and did something else.
Deal with it,
Because when you build certain things or you follow your gut, sometimes it doesn't pan out or it doesn't fit in the slot, but it revives later in a very powerful way. Or like you start something, or you talk to this one person because you went left instead of right. And, this is the kind of thing where you could say, you build your own luck, or you can say, the people are like, well, you just have a lot of fortune, or things seem to work out for you. But this is the kind of thing, because you can't explain it, so it seems very fortuitous. But it is following your instincts. It's following what knowledge you have in a powerful way. And I'll say there's so many things where I start going to a meeting, and then I say, I don't feel good about this meeting, and I'm not mean about it. I will call them and apologize that, hey, something came up and I can't attend this, but I don't have to explain it. And that's the biggest thing. I don't need a socially appropriate reason to do this or do that. I'm just got to go.
People feel like they do because they've been conditioned that way. And it's tough because even with myself, like I've had to learn this over the last couple of years, and sometimes I call it, with my wife, I joke around, I say it's like I'm like a 70 or 80-year-old man trapped in a 37-year-old's body, because sometimes there's no need to BS. There's no need to curry favor. There's no need to fit into a box and just be like, listen, I can't make it. And like, if people are going to accept you where you're at and love where you're at, great. And if not, then so be it.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes back so much important to you. Talk about family and you talk about all these things. People ask me, how do you build your own business and how have you been balancing all this stuff? How do you still get 8 hours of sleep? How do you make time for your family and friends? It's because for every decision I make, I don't spend 15 minutes premeditating it. Like the amount of productivity that unlocks, and this is coming back to a process point, which is exactly what you described. It's if you don't worry, if you're just living truthfully and honestly, and your intentions are good, you don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to make an excuse. You don't need to, like, if this person's upset,
no justification.
It's not my fault that they're upset. And when you start cutting that out of your life, that's where you get the extra minutes. That's where you get the extra hours.
It adds up.
It adds up big time. I mean, I remember, I'm going to make this person mad, and staring at the email I was about to write for 5 minutes before I write it. Today, that takes me 10 seconds. It's like, I'm sorry, this is what's happening, and this is what I feel. And I don't censor myself. And when you start living like that, that's the productivity. That's the following your gut.
There's a truth and a freedom.
That's how you build. It's freedom. And that's how, I couldn't be an entrepreneur another way. I know some people really wrestle it to the ground for years. For me, that would
They've been conditioned that way. And another thing, a secret to success for really high-performing entrepreneurs in whatever discipline they're in, is the art of saying no. And the art of not wasting anyone's time, because people will be more thankful that you didn't waste their time and maybe went on a meeting that was pointless because you felt obligated to show up versus just saying, hey, you know what, like either something came up truthfully, or hey, this isn't going to work out, let's look at something else, or hey, you know what, high five, let's part ways friends. But being straightforward with people, number one, it goes a lot way for the truth side of things and being honest with yourself and honest with them. And then for the practical business standpoint of it, you're saving a ton of time.
Ton of time. A lot of people, they don't play this through. Like you said, like the person, you save them time. If you're doing what's right for you, honestly, you're doing mostly what's right for other people around you also. And a lot of people tell me, oh, well, my boss asked for these things and I feel like he's going to be upset if I push back. And I said, you got to play this through. If you push back and guard yourself to do good work, you will become the person doing the best work in the office.
You're going to be highly regarded. And I used to talk, there's people in my life, we'll say, just to remain nameless, that have these internal dialogues that become dialogues, with me. And as far as being able to stand up in that environment, especially a corporate environment, and do it in a tactful way, but in an honest way, a lot of times that garners so much more respect versus just being the pushover. Someone who could just say what they want, do what they want, and you just go with the ebb and flow of things. Or if you truly believe in something, and if it's something that can add value, whether they may not see it now, but down the road, and you plant your flag and say, this is what I believe in, this is how we can get there, let's do this, and it may go against the grain. I found in my career personally, when I used to work in corporate, I used to get so much more recognition.
So much more.
For being independent.
Yeah.
And like being a rebel. And that's completely my ethos and like what I do as a rebel financial advisor now. But like that's where it was built. And if I didn't do those things, if I didn't grow that habit and that atomic habit of doing these things again and again and doing them well, I would probably, who knows where I could be, but I might not be nearly as happy as I am today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
I totally agree. And a big part of that too is you are sometimes going to run into people who will fire you, who will actually vilify you, who will actually put you down for being honest and trying to do good work and trying to help yourself and your colleagues. And that's not the right place for you. And that's what it comes down to a lot, where people are afraid to accelerate the inevitable. I run into that all the time with people I mentor and I coach, which is that, they're saying, well, I'm trying to build positive momentum here. I want to have a good resume credit for the future. I don't want to burn this bridge, but it never will work out for you.
The bridge isn't even there anymore.
Yeah.
It's like you're looking across the mountain with no way to get there.
There's no bridge to save. That's exactly right. If a relationship where the other person doesn't respect you, it's not worth saving or trying to stay under the radar.
Or maybe they're not the right person for you anyway.
Just
to grow
say
with.
the thing. And if they fire you, that's kind of a fire under you to start looking for a better place, a better thing to do. And a lot of people are they see the immediate negative repercussions. We're trained to not create waves, and that's an issue. And now we're like bridging into something totally else.
No, being a disruptor is a good thing. And doing it the right way, obviously, not living your truth and being practical at the same time. But it comes a point when there's just like you got to run through the wall, go over the wall, break the wall down, and just be honest with what you do. And that resonates all the way through your life. And so now that we're kind of, in this season of you with Cavi Consulting and your spiritual growth and your personal development, all that blends together. Looking forward with best laid plans isn't necessarily like something that you're into doing. And so if you could share with, I guess this is a good way to kind of segue to this, but if you could share with people that are building a business or going on a spiritual journey, what's kind of like the mentality you can leave with them on trying to either tie those things together and work on them simultaneously, or to just focus on one? Like what would be some best practices for people to evolve in those areas of life? Yeah, for sure. So especially in relating to my own personal experience, if you're trying to build a business, you are trying to evolve yourself as a person. So, when we're talking about the group of people that we call entrepreneurs, unless you're really out there to just gamble with the next unicorn app, or you're just trying to make, $1 million on some idea you just came up with, most people who decide, I'm going to start doing my own thing, I'm going to start doing something I care about. I'm going to start trying to solve a problem, either that I experience or people around me experience. It's something they're passionate about, and you wouldn't have to pay them. They're working it because they want to work that. And to me, that is personal growth. That is your journey, because all of us are here to do just that. It's to do the things that you want to do, that make you happy, that make you energized to contribute and build. Because that's how we evolve as a people. The people who are just in their pocket doing their thing and doing it like all the time, doing that thing and creating something special, that's where your remit to the world. So I would say just continue to be honest with, is the business thing you're doing what you want to do? Because what a lot of happens when your business grows, and I know I went through these cycles too, you get into financial trouble. You get a little bit under the gun. You start hiring your first people. You start, hitting making
your first
decisions
roadblocks.
Based off maybe not the best idea.
Or you start to get flustered or overwhelmed, or you start to sleep a little less, and then you start relying on best practice, or you start relying on how the wheel was built before you, or you pull in the expert who's been doing this for 30 years. You lose your truth is kind of what happens. And I think the way to maintain that is tying everything we've talked about together is remember the quiet moments. Remember when you were doing what you liked and what that felt like. Your business can always feel like that, and it should. If you start to compromise that, then you've lost yourself, and you've lost your own footing, and you've lost your own journey. So it's so important to keep them together, and they're one and the same, because a business, and you're building a business that's right, it is a manifestation of your own journey. It is the result of you being honest and true to yourself. So when you start to feel that's not the case, that's not a natural cycle. A lot of people tell themselves, like, this is the shit that I have to go through. This is growing pains. My advice from my experience and from what I help clients do in my own consulting practice is that's a lie. It doesn't have to be that way. There's always the option to slow down, to build your business with integrity, to not take that client, to not overextend into this venture. And that's how you grow a sustainable business. That's how you grow a conscious business. I love it. Well said, man. So as far as people finding Cavi Consulting or Sam Chin, how do they do that? Yeah, great. So if you're looking for Cavi Consulting, CaviConsulting.com is the best way to do it, and we're kind of growing with a lot of knowledge on that. You can read our blog, you can look at our processscience.org, where you can kind of see what is process science about in a practical way. But generally, just reach out to info@CaviConsulting.com. If you're watching this, you can reach out to me directly at sam.chin@CaviConsulting.com. And if you're interested in anything we talked about, but most of all, if you're interested in kind of looking at how process science can help your business, you can feel free to reach out to me in any way that feels comfortable to you.
Awesome. He's the amazing, powerful, well-journeyed, well-understood of process, spirituality, and human behavior, Sam Chin. I'm Jesse T. Make sure to catch us on the next episode of The Jesse T Show. Take care.